Looking back now, I can still remember every detail of that night with unsettling clarity. It happened in early 2023, and even after all this time, I still can't explain what I experienced. I've replayed it in my mind countless times, trying to find a logical explanation, convincing myself there had to be one. But no matter how many times I revisit those memories, they always leave me with the same uncomfortable feeling, a feeling that something inside that house simply refused to be understood. Before then, I never enjoyed spending the night alone. I always found old houses unsettling, especially when they were completely silent after dark. But after what happened that weekend, that small discomfort evolved into something much deeper. Since that night, I honestly don't think I've willingly spent another night alone in any house. Fear has a strange way of rewriting your habits, and mine certainly did. At the time, my fiancé Ryan and I had just reached the end of our apartment lease. We had already begun searching for our first home together, but anyone who's been through that process knows how exhausting and stressful it can become. Every promising listing disappeared before we could even schedule a viewing, prices kept climbing, and our deadline to move out was getting closer every day. Then, almost as if fate had stepped in, one of my dad's oldest friends offered us an incredible opportunity. He owned a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood across town. The property had recently become vacant because the elderly couple who had lived there for decades had both passed away within only a few weeks of one another. Since he and my father had been lifelong friends, he offered us a month-to-month rental for an unbelievably low price. There was no long-term commitment, and we could stay for as long as we needed, while continuing our search for a permanent home. Financially, it was impossible to refuse. Emotionally, that was a completely different story. The moment my dad mentioned why the house was empty, something inside me tightened. I wish I could say I wasn't superstitious, but I've always believed that places can absorb emotions. Homes witness every joyful celebration, every heartbreaking argument, every illness, every final goodbye. Walls don't simply disappear when people leave them behind. Sometimes they feel as though they remember. Ryan couldn't have disagreed more. To him, the house was simply a fantastic deal. Cheap rent, safe neighborhood, plenty of space. End of discussion. He laughed every time I admitted the place made me uneasy. "You've watched way too many horror movies," he'd tease with a grin. Whenever I'd mention hearing a strange creak or feeling uncomfortable walking down the hallway after dark, he'd immediately start making exaggerated ghost noises from another room just to watch me jump. He loved getting a reaction out of me. To be fair, Ryan wasn't mean. He had one of those personalities that turned almost everything into a joke. Sometimes he pushed it too far and I'd throw a pillow at him or threaten to leave him sleeping on the couch. We'd laugh about it a few minutes later. Still, there were moments when even he admitted the house had a strange atmosphere. Not haunted, just different. The first thing anyone noticed after walking inside was the carpet. Every single room was covered in an old, faded tan carpet that looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. It smelled faintly of dust, cleaning chemicals, and something older that neither of us could identify. The fibers were flattened from years of footsteps, and despite multiple cleanings, dark discolorations were scattered throughout the house. Our landlord apologized immediately. "The carpets are coming out this week," he assured us. "I've already hired contractors to install hardwood floors." That was welcome news. But then Ryan asked a question I desperately wish had never been answered. "So what's the story behind that stain?" He pointed toward the center of the living room. Even before anyone answered, I noticed it. A large, irregular dark stain spread across the carpet beneath where an end table once stood. It wasn't fresh, not even close, but it had soaked so deeply into the padding that years of cleaning hadn't removed it completely. The room suddenly felt much colder. My dad's friend hesitated for only a moment before answering. The wife fell right there. His voice became noticeably quieter. She tripped one evening, struck her head against the corner of the end table, and lost a tremendous amount of blood before the ambulance arrived. I felt every hair on my arm stand upright. He continued before either of us could respond. They got her to the hospital, but she never came back home. Silence filled the room. Then he added something that made my stomach sink even further. Her husband had died only a few weeks earlier. Apparently, he had suffered a massive heart attack while working alone in the basement. 2 deaths. Same house. Less than a month apart. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I tried convincing myself that elderly people pass away every day. There was nothing supernatural about illness or old age. Houses don't become cursed simply because tragedy happened inside them. At least, that's what I kept repeating to myself. A few days later, the contractors arrived. The old carpet disappeared piece by piece, rolled into massive bundles, and hauled out through the front door. Watching those stained floors leave felt strangely satisfying, almost as though the house itself could finally breathe again. Fresh hardwood floors transformed everything. Soon after, painters covered every wall with bright, neutral colors, replacing years of faded paint and tiny imperfections. The difference was remarkable. Natural light suddenly filled the rooms. The house felt newer, cleaner, lighter. For the first time since moving in, I caught myself believing that maybe my imagination had simply gotten the better of me. Maybe all I needed was time. Our landlord also installed a modern security system throughout the house. Every single door and window was equipped with sensors. Whenever someone opened a door, an automated female voice echoed through the house. Front door open. Back door open. Garage door open. The first few days, it startled me every single time. After a while, it became almost irritating. But beneath the annoyance was something unexpected. Comfort. Knowing that every entrance was monitored made sleeping a little easier. If anyone entered the house, I'd know immediately. Or at least, that's what I believed. More than a month passed. Life settled into a comfortable routine. The strange feeling I'd carried since moving in slowly faded into the background. We unpacked everything, decorated the bedrooms, cooked dinners together, watched movies on the couch, and gradually stopped thinking about the couple who had once called the place home. The house no longer felt like someone else's. It finally felt like ours. Then Ryan's bachelor party arrived. He'd be leaving for the weekend with his friends, staying out of town for 2 nights before coming back home. When he finished packing his bag that Friday afternoon, he noticed I looked nervous. "You'll survive," he laughed. "If any ghosts show up, just tell them I'll be back Sunday." He flashed that same teasing grin he'd worn since the day we moved in. I rolled my eyes and forced myself to smile. But after watching his truck disappear down the street, the silence inside the house became almost overwhelming. For the first time, I was completely alone, and I had absolutely no idea that before the weekend was over, every belief I had about that house and about what can exist inside an empty home after dark was about to change forever. The only reason I convinced myself I could survive that weekend alone was because I wasn't truly alone. Rex was with me. He was a large Australian cattle dog, intelligent, fearless, and incredibly protective. If anyone had tried breaking into the house, I had no doubt he would have put himself between me and the danger without hesitation. Just having him nearby usually erased whatever irrational fears my imagination created. At least, that's what I believed before that weekend. Friday morning, July 7th, began like any other day. I left for work just after 7:00 a.m., kissed Ryan goodbye, and wished him a fun bachelor weekend. He was leaving a few hours later with his friends and wasn't expected home until Sunday afternoon. As I pulled out of the driveway, I remember looking back at the house through my rearview mirror. For reasons I couldn't explain, it looked strangely empty. Not abandoned, just watching. I laughed at myself almost immediately. It was just another old house, I reminded myself. Nothing more. That confidence lasted until I walked back through the front door that evening. The second I stepped inside, something felt different. Nothing had moved. Nothing appeared unusual. The rooms looked exactly as I'd left them. Yet, the atmosphere had changed. The silence felt unnaturally heavy, pressing against my ears until I could hear my own breathing. Even Rex seemed unusually subdued as he greeted me. Normally, he'd run circles around me after work, wagging his tail so hard his whole body shook. This time, he simply stood beside me, looking past me into the hallway, before finally relaxing enough to accept a scratch behind the ears. I convinced myself I was simply nervous because Ryan wasn't there. Living alone, even temporarily, can make perfectly ordinary sounds feel threatening. To cheer myself up, I ordered Thai food, something I almost never got to eat because Ryan couldn't stand it. It became my little tradition whenever he was out of town. I curled up on the couch with Rex beside me, turned on Times, The Office Times, and tried losing myself in familiar jokes I'd seen dozens of times before. For a while, it worked. I laughed. I relaxed. The house almost felt normal again. Around midnight, I shut off the television. The laughter disappeared. Instantly, the silence rushed back into the room. That's when I heard it. A noise. Faint, slow, coming from somewhere beneath my feet. At first, it sounded like wood settling inside the old foundation. Then it came again. A dull scrape, followed by what sounded unmistakably like a heavy object dragging across concrete. The basement. I froze where I stood. Older homes make strange noises all the time, I told myself. Pipes expand. Floor joists creak. Water heaters rumble. Every logical explanation raced through my head as I forced myself toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. Then Rex reacted. His head snapped toward the basement door so violently that even I jumped. Every muscle in his body stiffened. His ears flattened. The fur running down his spine slowly stood upright. Then he exploded. A deep, violent bark echoed through the house. Not once. Again. 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 This wasn't excitement. It wasn't curiosity. It was a warning. I've owned Rex long enough to know every sound he makes. Normally, he hardly barked at all. If he wanted attention, he'd whine softly or let out one of his signature howls that always made Ryan laugh. But I'd never not once heard him bark like this. Each bark sounded desperate, aggressive, almost frightened. He wasn't barking at me. He wasn't barking outside. He was barking directly at the basement door. I knelt beside him, gently grabbing his collar. "Rex, hey. It's okay." He didn't even acknowledge me. His eyes remained locked on the door. Then his barking stopped. For one horrifying second, complete silence filled the hallway. A low growl slowly emerged from deep inside his chest. It wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was the kind of growl animals make when every instinct tells them something dangerous is only a few feet away. Against every ounce of common sense, I reached for the basement doorknob. My hand trembled. The hinges groaned as I slowly pulled the door open. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. I immediately reached for the light switch. Click. The staircase illuminated. Nothing. Just old wooden steps leading into the unfinished basement. I leaned forward slightly. That's when a memory hit me like a punch to the stomach. The old man. This was where he'd died. Right downstairs. Completely alone. I don't care how irrational that sounds. Knowing that changed everything. Suddenly those stairs no longer looked ordinary. They looked like the entrance to somewhere I absolutely did not belong. I couldn't force myself to take even one step downward. My legs refused. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tried taking a picture from the top of the staircase, hoping I could zoom in afterward. The flash barely reached halfway into the basement. Everything beyond it dissolved into thick blackness. It was as if the darkness swallowed the light before it could reach the floor. Behind me, Rex continued growling. Not moving. Not blinking. Just staring. I slammed the basement door shut. I wasn't going down there. Not that night. Eventually, Rex stopped growling and followed me into the bedroom. But something about him remained completely wrong. Instead of curling beside me like he always did, he positioned himself at the foot of the bed facing the bedroom door. He never once looked at me. He never closed his eyes. Every few minutes his ears twitched towards sounds I couldn't hear. It looked less like a dog trying to sleep, and more like a guard waiting for someone to enter. Watching him was somehow more terrifying than hearing him bark. If he was afraid, what exactly was he listening to? Sleep barely came. Every creak made my heart race. Every shift of the house sounded like footsteps. I spent most of the night staring at the bedroom doorway, convinced that at any second someone or something would silently appear. Morning couldn't come fast enough. Sunlight eased my nerves enough that I laughed at myself while making coffee. Everything seemed ridiculous in daylight. I decided to distract myself by catching up on chores I'd been putting off all week. Laundry was first. Carrying a basket downstairs, I walked into the laundry room. Then, I stopped dead. The washing machine had moved. Not an inch. Not a few inches. It had been pulled several feet away from the wall until it sat almost in the center of the room. For several seconds, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. I dropped the laundry basket, backed into the hallway, and just stared. There had to be an explanation. Maybe vibration. Maybe uneven flooring. No, that was impossible. This washer weighed hundreds of pounds. It would have taken serious force to drag it that far, and if something that heavy had moved during the night, I would have heard it. Wouldn't I? After several minutes, I forced myself back inside. Nothing else looked disturbed. No broken pipes. No water leaks. No signs anyone had entered. Only the washer. I pushed it back against the wall. Even using my full weight, it barely budged. The entire time, one question kept repeating inside my head. Who or what moved it? I called Ryan immediately. Trying to sound calm, I told him everything. The basement. Rex. The growling. The washing machine. He listened quietly. I could hear skepticism in his silence, but I could also hear concern. Ryan was the kind of person who believed every mystery eventually had a logical explanation. Maybe vibrations. Maybe someone entered while we were gone. Maybe I accidentally remembered where the washer had been. He never dismissed me completely, but I could tell he was trying to solve the puzzle instead of accepting that maybe there wasn't an easy answer. Before hanging up, he told me they were leaving first thing Sunday morning. He promised he'd be home earlier than planned. That helped. A little. Saturday evening arrived far too quickly. I repeated the exact same routine. Ordered dinner. Curled up on the couch with Rex. Turned on Times, The Office. Pretended everything was normal. At exactly 9:18 p.m., normal ended. A deafening blast erupted outside the house. The sound hit with such force that I nearly dropped the remote. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a car crash. It sounded closer, sharper, like an explosion directly outside. Almost instantly, my phone vibrated. Garage camera motion detected. My stomach tightened. I opened the notification. The security footage showed the garage door standing completely open. That made absolutely no sense. We never used it. Ever. The garage was nothing more than a storage room because both of our vehicles were too large to fit comfortably inside. Then I noticed something even stranger. Several bright flashes illuminated the driveway. The camera microphone captured loud popping sounds resembling fireworks. But watching the footage felt wrong. The flashes weren't spreading through the sky. They were erupting low to the ground, almost as though something invisible stood in the driveway producing bursts of light. I rushed through the interior door leading into the garage. The driveway was empty. No smoke. No scorch marks. No fireworks. No people. Nothing. Just stillness. Complete, impossible stillness. I saved the footage anyway before closing the garage door and setting the alarm once again. By bedtime, my nerves were completely shattered. The fear had evolved into something far more confusing. I no longer knew what frightened me. Was there someone outside the house? Or had something inside it begun making itself known? 3 different times that night I got out of bed to verify every lock and every sensor. Everything was secure. Everything. Yet Rex refused to relax. Just like the previous night, he stationed himself at the foot of the bed facing the bedroom door. Every so often another quiet growl escaped his throat. Never loud. Never aggressive. Just enough to remind me he was still watching something I couldn't see. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Then, bang, my eyes flew open. Another violent crash. Then another. Someone or something was pounding on the front door with terrifying force. Not knocking. Hammering. Each impact shook the walls. I glanced at the clock. 3:39 a.m. The bedroom door was closed, keeping Rex inside with me. Neither of us moved. The pounding continued without pause. Boom, boom, boom. No voice. No doorbell. Just relentless blows that sounded less like someone asking to come inside and more like someone demanding entry. My entire body locked in place. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't even convince my legs to stand. Finally, forcing myself upright, I reached for the bedroom doorknob. Before my hand touched it, a calm electronic voice echoed through the silent house. Front door open. Every drop of blood drained from my face. The security system, someone, or something, had just come inside. I slammed the bedroom door shut, locked it with shaking hands, grabbed my phone to call 911, and the screen remained black. No matter how many times I pressed the power button, it wouldn't turn on. No matter how many times I pressed the power button, my phone refused to respond. The screen would flicker for a fraction of a second, then remain completely black. Not frozen, not dead, just black. It was as though something was preventing it from waking up. That was the exact moment my fear crossed into full-blown panic. Until then, I'd still been trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation for everything that had happened over the previous 2 days. Strange noise. An anxious dog. A washing machine somehow pulled into the middle of the room. The unexplained flashes outside. Individually, each event could be dismissed. Together, they felt like pieces of something much darker. Then I heard it. A faint metallic click. I slowly lifted my eyes from my useless phone toward the bedroom door. The doorknob moved, and first it barely twitched. Then it turned farther, back forward, again. It wasn't rattling because someone accidentally brushed against it. Someone, or something, was deliberately trying the handle. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. The room suddenly felt impossibly cold. Rex shot to his feet at the exact same moment. His growl filled the bedroom, not loud, but deep enough that I could feel it vibrating through the floor beneath me. The knob shook harder. It sounded like whoever was outside had begun twisting it with both hands. I completely lost control. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Go away. My voice cracked halfway through the words. The only response was another violent shake of the doorknob. Then, silence. Not comforting silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder whether the thing outside your door has simply stopped making noise, or is now standing perfectly still, listening to you breathe. Adrenaline finally overpowered my paralysis. I kept stabbing at the phone's power button. Miraculously, after what felt like an eternity, the screen finally lit up. I've never been so relieved to see a lock screen in my life. With trembling hands, I dialed 911. I could barely form coherent sentences. I told the dispatcher someone had broken into my house. I told her the security system announced that the front door had opened. I told her someone had been trying to get into my bedroom. She kept me on the line while officers were dispatched. Those few minutes waiting for them felt longer than the entire weekend. Every tiny sound inside the house made me jump. I refused to unlock the bedroom door until I heard the officers announcing themselves. When they finally cleared the house, they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. No intruder. No broken windows. No footprints. No signs that anyone had searched the rooms. The only thing they found was the front door, standing wide open. Exactly as the security system had announced, the officers searched every room, every closet, the basement, the garage. Outside the property, nothing. It was almost as though whoever or whatever had entered simply no longer existed. I showed them the strange security footage from earlier that evening. The garage door opening, the flashes across the driveway, the explosions. One officer watched the clip several times before shrugging. Probably some teenagers setting off fireworks. I stared at him. Fireworks. There wasn't a single spent firework anywhere outside. No scorch marks. No smoke. No debris. Nothing. Then came the explanation that frustrated me even more. When I asked how a locked front door could somehow swing open by itself, another officer casually replied, "Probably the wind." The wind. On a hot, humid July night with barely enough breeze to move the leaves, a deadbolt locked from the inside. Apparently, the wind had become skilled enough to unlock doors. I didn't argue. There wasn't any point. From their perspective, there simply wasn't enough evidence to suggest anything else. Eventually they left. By then, dawn was beginning to brighten the horizon. The moment their patrol car disappeared, I grabbed Rex, threw a few essentials into my car, and drove straight to my parents' house without looking back. I stayed there until Ryan returned from his bachelor weekend. Telling my parents the story wasn't nearly as comforting as I'd hoped. Like the officers, they leaned toward ordinary explanations. Stress. Fatigue. An overactive imagination fueled by knowing 2 people had died inside that house. Still, they could see how terrified I was. Whether they believed my interpretation or not, they knew something had deeply shaken me. When Ryan finally came home, I told him every detail from beginning to end. Unlike me, he never believed I'd encountered anything paranormal. That wasn't who he was. He believed mysteries always had answers. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Still, even he admitted something about the entire sequence of events bothered him. Too many coincidences. Too many unanswered questions. Enough at least to make him genuinely worried about me. Oddly enough, nothing ever happened again. We remained in that house for another couple of months while searching for our own home. No mysterious noises. No moving appliances. No garage incidents. No pounding on doors in the middle of the night. Nothing. Eventually, we moved away. Life returned to normal. Yet, I never truly forgot that weekend. Before those 2 nights, I'd never experienced anything that challenged my understanding of reality. And in the years since, I never have again. As I'm telling this story now, nearly 3 years have passed. I've gone over every moment countless times searching for a logical explanation. Maybe there is one. Maybe there isn't. All I know is this. Whatever entered that house, whatever stood outside my bedroom door at 3:39 that morning, whatever made my fearless dog stand guard without sleeping for 2 consecutive nights, I pray I never encounter it again. There was another place that always made me uneasy for a completely different reason. A neighborhood bar. Technically, it wasn't directly beside my house. A thick line of tall pine trees separated the property from mine, creating just enough privacy that I couldn't constantly see the people drinking outside. But sound traveled perfectly. If I stood at the end of my driveway and looked through a narrow opening between the trees, I could see the smoking patio where customers gathered throughout the evening. Most nights it was simply annoying. Friday nights, Saturday nights, game nights, holiday weekends. The noise never seemed to stop. Back then I worked retail, which meant weekends weren't days off. They were usually my busiest shifts. While everyone else was celebrating at the bar until 2 in the morning, I was desperately trying to get enough sleep to survive another long day at work. It was a miserable combination. Most of my memories from that house involve loud music, drunken arguments, slamming car doors, and people laughing far louder than they realized. But among all those noisy nights, one stands apart from the rest. Even now, years later, I still think about it far more often than I'd like. Because unlike the countless drunken disturbances I'd grown accustomed to, this one ended with something I still can't explain. It was a Saturday evening. My best friend Isla came over for dinner. Calling her my best friend almost feels inadequate. She was more like the sister I never had. We'd known each other since elementary school, survived awkward teenage years together, and somehow remained inseparable as adults. Around that time, she had made it her personal mission to fix my disastrous dating life. This was before dating apps completely took over. Back then, meeting people required something I lacked entirely: confidence. Approaching a stranger sounded infinitely more terrifying than any haunted house. I've always been an unapologetic nerd. Comic books, collectible figures, video games, quiet weekends at home. Those things genuinely made me happy. Unfortunately, they weren't exactly ideal for meeting new people. Hila refused to accept defeat. Every few weeks, she'd somehow arrange another blind date. Each one ended about as awkwardly as the last. That evening was no different. Over dinner, she gave me another series of foolproof dating tips. Smile more. Stop overthinking. Ask questions. Don't immediately start talking about comic book lore. I promised I'd try. Neither of us believed it. Around 10 o'clock, her girlfriend called to say she had just gotten off work. I walked Hila outside to her car. We hugged, said goodbye, watched her pull away. As her taillights disappeared around the corner, loud laughter drifted through the trees from the bar. Curious, I glanced toward the smoking area. A group of 7 or 8 women stood together near the edge of the patio. They were clearly several drinks into the night, laughing uncontrollably, talking over one another. Their voices carried perfectly through the trees. I could even hear one woman loudly retelling an embarrassing story while everyone else burst into laughter. I smiled to myself and turned toward my front door. Then something stopped me. One of the women wasn't laughing anymore. She was staring directly at me. I instinctively looked around. Maybe someone had walked up behind me. Maybe she was looking past me. No, there wasn't another person anywhere nearby. Her eyes never left mine. The rest of the group eventually wandered back inside the bar. She didn't. She remained standing exactly where she was, completely still, almost as though she hadn't been part of the group at all. Then she slowly raised one hand and waved, a hesitant, almost uncertain gesture. I stood there awkwardly, unsure how to respond. After several seconds, she began waving more insistently. There was no misunderstanding now. She was definitely trying to get my attention. Feeling slightly embarrassed, I finally gave a small wave back. The instant I did, she smiled, then gently blew a kiss in my direction. It felt oddly surreal. Not frightening, just strange. I smiled politely, shook my head, and went back inside. I assumed she was simply intoxicated. Maybe she'd mistaken me for someone else. Maybe she was just being playful. Within minutes, I forgot about the interaction entirely. I settled into my favorite chair, booted up my gaming console, and spent the next several hours happily escaping into virtual worlds. For once, I actually had a weekend off. There was nowhere else I'd rather have been. Around 1:30 inches the morning, a soft knock echoed through the house. I paused the game, listened. Another gentle knock followed. Unlike the terrifying pounding I'd experienced years earlier, this sounded almost polite. Considering how close I lived to the bar, I wasn't immediately alarmed. Over the years, I'd had intoxicated strangers accidentally wander onto my porch more than once. I assumed this would be no different. I couldn't have been more wrong. Living next to that bar meant strange things happened all the time. Drunk people wandered onto the wrong property. Arguments spilled into the street. Someone occasionally mistook my mailbox for a trash can. A few times, people had even knocked on my front door in the middle of the night before stumbling away, realizing they had the wrong house. So when I heard that gentle knock around 1:30 a.m., I wasn't immediately frightened. Startled, sure, but not afraid. I figured it was just another intoxicated customer who had lost track of where they were. Still, something about hearing a knock that late at night always sends a pulse of adrenaline through your body. I quietly walked to the small window beside the front door and carefully peeked through the blinds. No one. The porch was completely empty. The motion light illuminated every inch of the front steps. There wasn't a single person standing there. I waited another few seconds, expecting someone to stumble back into view. Nothing. I let out a slow breath. They already walked away, I muttered to myself. Satisfied, I returned to the living room. Rather than jumping back into my game, I opened my laptop and started scrolling through random articles, trying to unwind before bed. The house was silent again. Almost too silent. Looking back now, I realize that's when I should have trusted my instincts. About 15 minutes passed. For reasons I still can't explain, I felt compelled to check the front window one more time. Not because I heard another knock. Not because I saw movement. Just a strange feeling. The kind that quietly whispers something isn't right. I stepped back to the window. The porch was still empty, but something else immediately caught my attention. A faint glow. My car's interior light was on. At first I thought I was imagining it. Then I noticed the driver's door. It wasn't closed. It was slightly open, only a few inches, just enough for the dome light to remain illuminated. Instead of fear, irritation washed over me. This wasn't the first time someone from the bar had tried checking parked cars for loose cash or forgotten valuables. Unfortunately for them, my car contained absolutely nothing worth stealing. The last time someone left the door cracked open, the battery had drained overnight. I wasn't about to let that happen again. I grabbed my keys, unlocked the front door, and stepped outside. The night air felt unusually still. Even the sounds from the bar seemed strangely distant. Walking toward the car, I instinctively glanced into the back seat before reaching for the handle. Empty. No one hiding. No scattered belongings. Nothing appeared disturbed. I pulled the door shut until it latched securely, hit the lock button, and walked back toward the house. Nothing unusual. At least, not yet. The moment I stepped back inside and locked the front door behind me, something made me stop. A smell. Soft, sweet, floral, lavender, not overpowering. Just enough to be unmistakable. I slowly inhaled again. The scent seemed fresh, almost as though someone wearing expensive perfume had only recently walked through the hallway. My first thought was Hila. Maybe the fragrance had lingered after she'd left earlier that evening, but that didn't make sense. She almost never wore perfume. In fact, one of the things I'd always noticed about Hila was that she preferred unscented lotions because strong fragrances gave her headaches. Besides, she had left hours ago. The smell should have disappeared long before now. I shrugged it off. Maybe whoever knocked on my door had been wearing too much perfume and some of the scent drifted inside when I opened it. It wasn't impossible, just unusual. Eventually, I shut down my computer, powered off the game console, and headed upstairs. Even after brushing my teeth and getting comfortable beneath the blankets, I couldn't completely relax. The strange knock, the open car door, the lingering perfume, none of it frightened me by itself. Together, though, they created a quiet uneasiness that refused to leave. To distract myself, I turned on a movie. The familiar dialogue slowly faded into background noise as I drifted towards sleep. I have no idea how much time passed before something pulled me awake. A sound. At first, I thought it was part of the movie. I paused it. The room became silent. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside. Soft, quick, barely audible. Someone or something was moving rapidly through the hallway outside my bedroom. The footsteps weren't heavy enough to belong to a grown man. They sounded almost weightless. Light, quick, almost playful. Back and forth, circling the hallway. My heart began pounding so violently I could hear it inside my ears. Holding my breath, I slowly climbed out of bed and crept toward my bedroom door. The hallway beyond remained hidden. I pressed my ear against the wood. The footsteps stopped. For one brief second, absolute silence. Then, a quiet giggle. A woman's laugh. Soft, high-pitched. Not loud enough to sound threatening. If anything, it sounded cheerful. That somehow made it infinitely worse. There is something deeply unsettling about hearing laughter inside a house where you know you're supposed to be alone. Another giggle floated through the hallway. Then the footsteps resumed. Faster now, almost as though whoever was outside was running circles around my bedroom. I immediately pushed the bedroom door completely shut and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone while dialing 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone had broken into my house, most likely another drunk from the bar. At least, that's what I desperately hoped. The dispatcher instructed me to remain inside the room until officers arrived. Waiting became torture. Every second stretched into an eternity. The footsteps continued. Then suddenly, nothing. Silence returned so abruptly that it almost felt unnatural. Several minutes passed without another sound. I convinced myself whoever had entered must have left. Maybe they realized someone had called the police. Maybe they'd escaped through a back door. Against my better judgment, I decided to check. From my closet, I grabbed one of my father's old golf clubs. It was the closest thing I had to a weapon. Holding it with sweaty hands, I slowly opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. Every light remained exactly as I'd left it. Moving one cautious step at a time, I cleared each room. Living room, dining room, hallway. Nothing. When I finally reached the kitchen, I stopped breathing. Someone was standing there. A small blonde woman, completely motionless. Her back faced me as she stared out the kitchen window into the darkness outside. She wore a faded pink dress that looked decades old. The fabric hung in torn strips around her legs, dirty, worn, almost as though she'd been wandering through the woods for years. For several horrifying seconds, she never moved. Then, recognition struck me. My stomach dropped. It was her. The woman from the bar. The one who had waved at me. The one who had smiled. The one who had blown me a kiss. But something was terribly wrong. She no longer looked intoxicated. She didn't sway. She didn't breathe. She simply stood there, watching the darkness beyond the glass. I hadn't made a sound, not a single step loud enough for anyone to hear. Yet, without turning around, she spoke in a calm, almost cheerful voice. "Hey, buddy." "A pause." "I know you're there." Every hair on my body stood on end. Then, with impossible speed, she spun around. Her head snapped toward me so violently it looked almost inhuman. Our eyes met. The smile on her face stretched unnaturally wide. Before my brain even processed what I was seeing, she lunged. Not walked. Not ran. She charged directly toward me with terrifying speed. Instinct took over. I dropped the golf club and sprinted down the hallway. I threw myself into the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it just as she reached the other side. The first knock was gentle, and then another, almost polite. Her voice drifted through the door, soft, sweet, almost comforting. "Please, open the door." She knocked again. "I just want to talk." Another knock, longer this time, slower, more deliberate. Then came silence. I stood there barely breathing, staring at the doorknob, terrified it would begin turning. Just as I thought I couldn't endure another second, red and blue lights flashed through the bathroom window. A police cruiser had finally arrived, and for the first time that entire night, I felt there might actually be a chance I was going to make it out alive. The pounding on the bathroom door stopped only when I heard another sound echo through the house. "Police?" A loud, commanding voice. Then another. "Police department. If anyone's inside, announce yourself." For several seconds I couldn't move. My entire body had locked up from fear. I wasn't even sure the voices were real. After everything that had happened that night, my mind no longer trusted what my ears were hearing. Then came another knock. This time it wasn't soft. It was firm, professional. "Sir, if you're in there, open the door." Only then did I finally unlock the bathroom door. The moment it swung open, 2 uniformed officers were standing in the hallway with flashlights raised. No woman, no footsteps, no laughter, nothing. The hallway was completely empty. For a brief second, I genuinely questioned my own sanity. Had I imagined everything? Then one of the officers looked toward the floor. "So, what's this doing here?" I followed the beam of his flashlight. Lying only a few inches outside the bathroom door was one of my kitchen steak knives. It hadn't been there when I ran inside. I knew that with absolute certainty. The knife was positioned almost perfectly in front of the doorway, its blade reflecting the officers' flashlights. No one could explain how it got there. The officers immediately searched the rest of the house. Every room, every closet, every window, every possible hiding place. Then one of them called out from the kitchen. The back door's open. A cold wave washed over me. I knew I'd locked every entrance before going upstairs. The officers believed the intruder must have escaped through the back door moments before they arrived. That explanation certainly made more sense than anything my terrified imagination had created. Still, something about the entire situation refused to sit right with me. How had she entered without me noticing? Why hadn't I heard the back door open? And why had she remained inside the house instead of simply leaving? The following afternoon, curiosity finally outweighed exhaustion. I walked over to the neighborhood bar with one of the responding officers' suggestions still echoing in my head. If she came from the bar, someone there probably knows her. The owner barely let me finish describing the woman before he nodded. "Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about." He looked more annoyed than surprised. According to him, she'd wandered into the bar earlier that evening looking disheveled, dirty, and clearly unstable. She wasn't with anyone. She kept approaching customers, interrupting conversations, and making people visibly uncomfortable. Eventually, enough guests complained that the owner asked her to leave. She refused. Security had to escort her outside. Even then, she lingered around the parking lot for quite a while, silently watching people come and go. Only after the owner threatened to call the police did she finally disappear into the darkness. At least, that's what everyone assumed. Apparently, she hadn't gone very far. I never saw her again after that night. Not once. To this day, I still have no idea why she chose me. Maybe she'd been suffering from severe mental illness. Maybe she was homeless. Maybe she was under the influence of drugs. Or maybe I simply happened to make eye contact with the wrong person at exactly the wrong moment. For weeks afterward, I replayed every second of that night in my mind. Eventually, one possibility made horrifying sense. When I stepped outside to close my car door, I'd left my front door standing open, only for a minute, maybe less. If she'd been hiding somewhere near the porch in the darkness beside the bushes or around the corner of the house, it would have taken only seconds for her to slip quietly inside while my attention was focused on the car. She could have been standing inside my house, watching me, before I ever realized she was there. That thought still sends chills down my spine. Thankfully, the night ended without anyone getting physically hurt. Looking back, I realize how unbelievably fortunate I was. Had I confronted her instead of running, had she decided to use that knife, my story could have ended very differently. More than anything, I hope she eventually received the help she desperately needed, because whatever pain or illness she was carrying that night, I sincerely hope she never passed it on to someone else. For most of my life, solitude has never frightened me. In fact, I've always preferred it. People often assume that means I had a lonely childhood or difficult relationships. Neither is true. My family has always been supportive. I've had meaningful relationships throughout my life. The reality is much simpler. I've always functioned best when I was alone. Whenever a relationship started becoming too serious, I was usually the one who ended it. Not because I stopped caring. Not because anyone did something wrong. I simply enjoyed my independence too much. Some people recharge by surrounding themselves with others. I've always recharged in silence. That independence became one of the biggest reasons my career flourished. Without distractions, I poured nearly every waking hour into building my business. Years of relentless work slowly transformed a small freelance operation into a company that eventually allowed me to travel across the country and sometimes overseas, working with clients from every imaginable background. People often oversimplify what I do by calling me an interior decorator. Technically, that's true, but the work is far more personal than choosing furniture or matching paint colors. My clients trusted me to transform empty spaces into homes that reflected who they were. Every project began with long conversations. How do you want this room to feel? What memories should it create? How should someone feel the moment they walk through the front door? Designing spaces meant understanding people. Ironically, I became very good at understanding other people's lives while keeping my own remarkably isolated. By my mid-30s, years of nonstop work finally paid off. I bought the house I'd dreamed about owning since my 20s. It wasn't enormous. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Walking through those empty rooms on moving day remains one of the proudest moments of my life. For 6 peaceful months, everything was exactly as I'd imagined. By then, my business had grown enough that I could choose which clients I wanted to accept. Demand far exceeded the number of projects I could realistically complete. Turning people away became an unfortunate necessity. Even when I wasn't traveling to meet clients, most of my work happened inside my home office. Long days blurred together. Coffee, blueprints, video meetings, material samples, late nights refining layouts. It became my routine. Then, a strange sound interrupted it. The first time I heard it, I barely looked up from my computer. It lasted only a few seconds. A slow, dragging noise. Not loud, just enough to catch my attention. It sounded remarkably similar to someone pushing a heavy cardboard box across a hardwood floor somewhere inside the house. Shh, scrape. Shh, scrape. I removed my headphones and listened. Nothing. Complete silence. Assuming I'd imagined it, I returned to work. Several days later, the sound came back. Exactly the same. Slow, measured, deliberate, as though something heavy was being pushed only a few rooms away. It never lasted long. Maybe 5 seconds. Maybe 10. Always just enough to make me pause. Never long enough for me to locate its source. At first, I blamed the house. Every home settles. Wood expands. Pipes vibrate. Older buildings have personalities. That's what I kept telling myself. But over the following weeks, one unsettling realization slowly began taking shape. The noise never happened randomly. It only ever occurred when I was completely alone. The sound never lasted very long. It was always the same. A slow, dragging, shuffling noise. Just loud enough to pull my attention away from whatever I was doing, yet never loud enough for me to immediately identify where it came from. Every single time I heard it, the room would fall completely silent afterward, as though whatever had made the sound knew I'd noticed. The first few occurrences barely registered in my mind. I was busy. Clients were calling. Emails were piling up. Deadlines didn't care whether strange noises came from somewhere inside the house. I'd simply pause for a second, listen, shrug, and return to work. But the sound kept returning. Not every day, not even at predictable times, just often enough that it slowly burrowed into the back of my mind. Eventually, curiosity outweighed productivity. One afternoon, the scraping echoed through the house again. I immediately pushed away from my desk and hurried upstairs. This time, I refused to ignore it. I walked through every room as quietly as I could, stopped, held my breath, listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. Only the quiet hum of the air conditioner. I searched every bedroom, opened every closet, checked every bathroom. Nothing seemed remotely unusual. The silence almost felt mocking, as if the house had intentionally stopped making noise the moment I decided to investigate. This pattern repeated itself over and over. I'd hear the shuffling, rush upstairs, find absolutely nothing. After several weeks, I honestly began questioning my own sanity. Was I imagining it? Had months of long work hours simply exhausted my brain? Then one afternoon, a memory surfaced. When I was growing up, squirrels had found their way into the roof of my parents' house. I remembered lying awake at night listening to tiny claws running across the ceiling. Anyone who's dealt with squirrels knows they can sound astonishingly loud. The scratching, the dragging, the occasional thump. More importantly, they destroy everything. Insulation, wood, electrical wiring. The moment that memory returned, my anxiety melted away. Of course, squirrels. That explained everything. I actually laughed at myself. For weeks I'd been inventing elaborate scenarios when nature had already provided a perfectly reasonable explanation. I made a mental note to call pest control. Then life got in the way. Another client, another project, another deadline. Every time I heard the shuffling, I'd scribble another reminder onto a sticky note. Call exterminator. By the end of the week, several identical notes sat scattered across my desk. Ironically, I never made the call. A few nights later, work kept me occupied much later than usual. By the time I finally shut down my computer, it was already after 2 o'clock in the morning. The entire house felt unusually still. I crawled into bed exhausted, expecting sleep to come immediately. Instead, I heard it. The shuffling. Only this time, something was different. During the day, the noise always lasted only a few seconds before disappearing. Now, it continued. Slow, steady, persistent. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It sounded as though something heavy was being... I stared upward into the darkness. The sound continued. After several minutes, frustration outweighed fear. I climbed onto the mattress, stood carefully near the headboard, and pressed one ear against the ceiling. The scraping stopped instantly. Relief lasted less than a second, because another sound replaced it. Breathing. Very slow. Very deliberate. Not loud. Just close enough that it sounded as though whoever or whatever was inhaling sat only inches above my head. I immediately stepped off the bed. My pulse exploded. No, that wasn't possible. I tried convincing myself I'd mistaken air moving through the vents for breathing. Except the rhythm sounded human. Long inhale, slow exhale. Again, again, again. Then I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. The crawl space. My house had a tiny unfinished crawl space tucked above the second floor. Calling it an attic would be generous. It was barely large enough for someone to crawl through, which was exactly why I'd never stored anything inside it. Then another realization struck. The crawl space was directly above my bedroom. Every drop of blood seemed to drain from my body. If I truly heard breathing, then something was breathing directly over my head. Even then, I stubbornly clung to logic. Squirrels. I repeated the word aloud. Squirrels. I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself toward the hallway. The crawlspace hatch was recessed into the ceiling, opened by pulling a release cord attached near the wall. Being as short as I am, I couldn't even reach it without dragging over a chair. Standing on shaky legs, I reached upward and grabbed the cord. Nothing happened. I pulled harder. Still nothing. Maybe it had jammed. I yanked with both hands. Suddenly, clack. The latch released. The folding ladder dropped downward with a loud metallic snap that echoed through the empty hallway. The sound alone nearly made me jump off the chair. I swallowed hard. Every instinct told me to walk away. Instead, I climbed. Each step creaked beneath my weight. The darkness above seemed unnaturally thick, swallowing the beam from my flashlight before it could reach the far corners. Finally, my head rose above the opening. I slowly lifted the flashlight. The crawl space was exactly as I'd remembered. Cramped. Dusty. Bare wooden beams stretching into darkness. Insulation packed tightly along the floor. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing stared back. At least, nothing I could see. I never climbed all the way inside. Fear rooted me to the ladder. After only a few nervous seconds, I pulled myself back down and closed the hatch as quickly as I could. I told myself I'd overreacted. I was allowing stress to invent monsters where none existed. Still, sleep no longer felt possible. I carried a blanket into the living room, switched on the television, and let old reruns play quietly in the background. The voices distracted me just enough to stop imagining someone hidden between those massive support beams. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. I drifted in and out of shallow sleep. Then, a slow creak, wood rubbing against wood. My eyes opened instantly. The sound was unmistakable. A door opening. I sat upright on the couch. The television continued flickering silently across the room. For several seconds, I heard nothing else. I stood carefully, scanned the living room. Nothing. Kitchen. Nothing. Every shadow remained exactly where it belonged. Trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, I walked slowly toward the hallway. Darkness stretched all the way to my office. The hallway felt far longer than it ever had before. I reached for the light switch. Click. Bright light flooded the corridor. For one terrifying heartbeat, I genuinely expected someone to be standing at the opposite end, waiting, watching. Instead, the hallway stood empty. Still clutching the flashlight, I searched my office. Everything remained untouched. Desk computer, bookshelves, exactly as I'd left them. Relief slowly began replacing panic. Maybe the sound really had come from the television. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe. I started upstairs. The moment I reached the second floor, my entire body froze. The crawl space release cord hung from the ceiling, not neatly secured against the wall where I'd left it. It dangled freely, moving, ever so slightly, back and forth. Back and forth. I stared at it for several seconds. Maybe I forgot to tuck it back into place. Maybe. Considering how terrified I'd been earlier, it wasn't impossible. That's what I kept telling myself. I continued toward my bedroom. Halfway down the hallway, another detail caught my attention. My bedroom door. It was almost completely closed. I never closed it. Ever. Not when I lived alone. Not even by accident. I always left it wide open. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The moment I pushed it inward, Kriya, the exact sound that had awakened me downstairs. Not similar, identical. My pulse pounded inside my ears. I switched on the bedroom light. Everything appeared perfectly normal. The bed remained neatly made. The dresser untouched. Nothing broken. Nothing stolen. I actually laughed under my breath. Nerves, I whispered. You're losing it. Then, something near the bed caught my eye. A small pile of dirt. No larger than a handful. It hadn't been there earlier. Curious, I walked over and knelt beside it. The soil looked damp, fresh, almost as though it had recently fallen from somewhere above. As I leaned closer, I heard it again, breathing. This time, much closer. The sound wasn't above me anymore. It was below me, slowly, almost against every instinct. I lowered myself until I was nearly lying on the floor. Then I looked beneath the bed. Two eyes were already looking back. A middle-aged man lay perfectly still beneath my bed, his face only a few feet from mine. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't frightened. It was calm. Almost welcoming. A scream tore out of my throat before I even realized I'd made a sound. I threw myself backwards so violently my hands slammed against the hardwood floor. The man never crawled out, never blinked, never broke eye contact. Instead, he smiled. In a voice so gentle it sounded almost comforting, he quietly said, "Hi, Julie." A brief pause. "It's okay." Those 3 words were somehow more terrifying than if he had screamed. My body reacted before my mind could. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. For one horrifying moment, it felt as though the floor itself had swallowed my legs. My muscles refused to obey. I pushed backward with my hands, desperate to put even a few inches of distance between myself and the man beneath the bed. It felt like trying to escape through wet concrete. My breathing became shallow, my vision blurred. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding violently inside my ears. The man never lunged. He never crawled toward me. Somehow, that made everything infinitely worse. He simply remained there, lying perfectly still beneath my bed as though he'd always belonged there. His eyes never left mine. Not once. His expression remained disturbingly calm, almost comforting, almost kind. Then he spoke again. "It's okay." His voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It sounded reassuring, like a father trying to calm a frightened child. It's okay. Again. It's okay. Again. Every repetition somehow became more horrifying than the last. There was something deeply unnatural about hearing words meant to comfort coming from a complete stranger hiding beneath your bed. My survival instincts finally overpowered the paralysis. I stumbled to my feet, nearly slipping as I scrambled toward the bedroom door. Behind me, his voice continued following me through the room. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. He never shouted. He never sounded rushed. If anything, his calmness terrified me far more than screaming ever could. I practically threw myself down the staircase, missing several steps in the process. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed awkwardly near the bottom, but I barely noticed. My only thought was getting out. Away anywhere but inside that house. I snatched my phone from the kitchen counter, fumbled with my car keys, and burst through the front door without looking back. I didn't stop to lock it. I didn't stop to check whether he was following me. I didn't even remember fastening my seatbelt. The engine roared to life. Within seconds, I was speeding away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Every few seconds, I glanced into the rearview mirror, half convinced I would see him sitting quietly in the back seat, or standing barefoot in the middle of the road behind me. Instead, there was only darkness. The nearest place still open was a 24-hour diner a few miles away. Bright lights spilled across the parking lot like a beacon. I pulled into the lot far too fast, slammed the car into park, and practically ran inside. The waitress looked up from behind the counter. One look at my face told her something was terribly wrong. I don't even remember what I said. I was crying, shaking uncontrollably, trying to explain between gasping breaths that someone had been hiding inside my house. Someone had been living there, watching me, listening to me, sleeping only a few feet above my bedroom. The employees immediately called 911. Within minutes, officers arrived at the diner. One stayed with me while several others raced toward my house. The drive back with the police felt endless. Part of me desperately wanted them to find him. The other part prayed they wouldn't, because if they didn't, then where'd he gone? The officers searched everything. Every bedroom, every closet, every bathroom, the basement, the garage, the attic, the crawl space, every inch of the property. Nothing. No man. No footprints. No fingerprints that could identify anyone unfamiliar. No signs of forced entry. He had vanished, almost as though he dissolved into the walls, but he had left behind proof. Hidden behind one of the large support beams inside the crawl space, officers discovered several empty plastic water bottles, a worn, flattened pillow, a few scraps of food, wrappers. Dust had been pushed aside to create what looked unmistakably like a small sleeping area. Someone hadn't merely entered my home. Someone had been living above me for days, maybe weeks, possibly longer. The realization made me physically sick. Every late-night phone call, every client meeting conducted from my office, every shower, every meal, every hour I believed I was completely alone. Someone may have been only a few feet away, listening, watching, waiting. Suddenly, every strange noise I dismissed over the previous months took on an entirely different meaning. The dragging sounds, the breathing, the unexplained footsteps. They had never been squirrels. They had been human. I couldn't bring myself to return home. Instead, I checked into a small motel on the opposite side of town. One night became 3. 3 nights became a week. Eventually, nearly an entire month passed before I gathered enough courage to step back inside my own house. Even then, I refused to stay there alone. Every ceiling creak made me look upward. Every unexplained noise sent my pulse racing. The place no longer felt like my dream home. It felt contaminated, like every room carried invisible memories of someone who had quietly occupied the same space without my knowledge. The first thing I did was invest thousands of dollars into security. High-definition cameras covered every entrance. Motion detectors monitored the hallways. Window sensors. Glass break alarms. Additional locks. Smart notifications connected directly to my phone. Friends joked that my house looked more secure than a bank. They weren't wrong. Peace of mind suddenly became priceless. More than a year has passed since that night. No one has ever broken in again. No cameras have captured anything unusual. No strange noises have returned. Officially, the case remains unsolved, but I've never stopped wondering who that man really was. Over time, one unsettling possibility kept returning to me. When I was younger, my father had a longtime friend who eventually disappeared from our lives. As a child, I never understood why. Years later, my father finally admitted the truth. The man had developed an unhealthy obsession with me. Nothing criminal had happened, but his behavior became disturbing enough that my father permanently cut all contact with him. The man beneath my bed looked older, much older. Time had changed his face, but there were moments, certain angles, certain expressions that reminded me of him. I can't prove it was the same person. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe my traumatized mind simply searched for a familiar explanation because the alternative felt even more frightening. Because if it wasn't him, then who was he? How did he know my name? How long had he been watching me before I ever heard that first shuffling sound? How many nights had he waited silently above my bedroom while I slept beneath him, completely unaware? Those are questions I'll probably never be able to answer. People often tell you to lock your doors, install better locks, buy security cameras, set alarms. Those things matter. They absolutely do. But after everything that happened, I've learned something far more unsettling. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't someone trying to get into your home. Sometimes they're already inside long before you realize you were never alone.